Well, when I was preparing this week, I actually took Friday off, played a little golf early, and thought, well, I'll get my prophecy update done, and then I won't have to um, ignore people when I'm here on Sunday morning. But then I started looking at things and trying to sift through things, and I called this one this week enough. You can say that it's more than enough, or I've had enough, but enough. Okay, it was really difficult as I sifted through the things that I usually sift through, and news sources and blogs and the wonderful people who send me a lot of links to look at. I I really I was really perplexed today as I tried to distill all of this information into something presentable to people today, because it really, in my mind, it really was one of the busier weeks that I've had. And it's like, somebody take a vacation, okay? All of you end-time players, go on vacation, take a few days, go out in the lake with your friends, take your private jets and go someplace. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So we talk each week about this convergence of the events. I'm going to read this verse, and before you write in, okay, and comment, I know that this verse has a future application, but it is relevant, and I'll explain why in a moment. In these verses, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And by the way, I copied this off my computer very quickly, so I think it's King James Version, but I don't know. It was ever what was open on my Bible Gateway this morning. So I didn't check, so apologize if that is a problem for some people. It doesn't really make any difference in these verses anyway. 2 Thessalonians chapter 9. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believe in the truth, but have pleasure in unrighteousness. I think you'll see the applicability of this, and I know that there is a time in the future when the man of lawlessness, the man of sin, the son of perdition will be revealed. And he will sort of bring to a climax all of this evil and things that we see in the world. That's why it's relevant right now, in the sense that it's not going to be nothing, and then the man of sin is revealed, and all of a sudden we have evil. There's going to be a progression, and it's going to reach a climax. And I really do think we are at this time where we see this increasing in the world. It's sort of like a bucket. Well, one of the things that other people did in college, I never participated, other than to say that was kind of cool. In our dorm, we had tile floors, and so they would take the big waste cans out of the bathroom. They're about 50 gallons probably. Fill them with water and lean them up against the door of somebody and knock on somebody's door, and they would open it, and it would fall in, and it was like a small tsunami going through the room. And it was always funny because it always, fortunately, never happened to me. But the bucket was full, and it was only effective because it was already full when it tipped over. That's the way this evil, I view this coming lawlessness and evil as happening. The bucket's being filled up. It's almost there to overflowing, and eventually it's going to tip over and it's going to flood everything. We see, though, the manifestations of that in the world, and I think we'll see that in a moment as I go through some things. So here is a statistic. Now, some of this is from these are a couple old things from a couple 3 years ago, knowledge doubling every 12 months, soon to be every 12 hours. And I think we're at that stage. But I want you to be clear that what's doubling is knowledge, not wisdom. It seems that as knowledge doubles, wisdom halves. It's falling exponentially. We saw a lot of that this week. A friend of mine from the UK had posted this on his Facebook page that this is from a few years ago to maybe explain why Britain wanted to get out of the EU. EU bans claim that water can prevent dehydration. And there's actually a thing that they put out, a publication with these conclusions. What was happening was somebody was selling water in water bottles and claiming that it would prevent dehydration. I know you're looking at me like, this is what the EU people do, the bureaucrats, and they concluded that it was not, they couldn't do that. Look at these. The food constituent water, which is the subject of the health claim, is sufficiently characterized. The claimed effect is regular consumption of significant amounts of water can reduce the risk of development of dehydration and concomitant decrease in performance. The target population is assumed to be the general population. Dehydration is a condition of body. This, by the way, it's about 8-page, single-spaced. Dehydration is a condition of body water depletion. The proposed risk factors are measures of water depletion and thus are measures of the disease. The proposed claim does not comply with the requirements for a disease risk deduction claim pursuant to Article 14 of Regulation EC number 1924/2006. Okay? So don't do that. My suggestion was, why don't we lock the bureaucrats in a room for 3 days and then ask them to write this nonsense? With no water. Right. Nothing. No food or water. And see how they feel. So, I'm glad we have people in government to help us through these problems that nobody ever figured out. This is an old tweet from Hillsong Church, New York, from the pastor there, Carl Lentz, that some of my friends posted this week. He said this: "You don't have to know the roadmap if you know who created the map." Now, this sounds very much like what Andy Stanley said in one of his sermons. You don't really, you just need to have faith. You don't really need to believe the Bible, or I can't remember exactly what he said. It was something along that. It's the same thing, which is nonsense, okay? I mean, if you know Rand McNally, or you know the makers of the GPS, TomTom, if you know TomTom personally, it doesn't help you any bit to get where you're going, right? Everybody knows this. But this is what passes for being a hip, young, cool pastor of a vibrant, urban, growing church that everybody wants to be like. And it's sheer, utter nonsense. It's vacuous, vapid, empty thinking. It is nonsensical. But I am sure, in fact, if you look down here, do you see the little thing there by the 802 by the little like button? 802 people liked that. 86 people thought it was profound enough to share. That's a problem. In education standards, or in the world, this is a great article on Breitbart by Matthew Archibald, saying, in politically correct world, Christianity is the new secondhand smoke. This is what's coming. Persecution. Jesus warned us about it. He told us it would come. It would even come from people we thought were part of our family or friends or part of the household of faith. It's coming. And what he's saying is, there's a lot of things in the world today that are okay and acceptable. I mean, we've had the discussion on the whole transgender and bathroom thing, but there are certain sacred cows that are untouchable, one of which is secondhand smoke. Another one is global warming. Although now they're talking about an ice age, which, okay, I'm not sure the thing. I refer to the quote, Rachel Maddow, the liberal commentator, host of a show on MSNBC, said once, I think that global warming means extreme weather of all kinds. She actually said that on the David Letterman show. So I wish I had the clip, but Dennis Prager plays it all the time. So there are certain things you can't challenge. And what his point here in his article, which I would hope you would look up, I'll try to post the link to it, is you just don't talk about Christianity the same way that you did a generation ago. It's like secondhand smoke. Even though the studies show you secondhand smoke are pretty slim at causing problems, it's just it's verboten. I mean, that's one of the ones we can really attack. So, and what his point is, instead of people saying God bless you now, they'll say good thoughts and that type of thing. Have good thoughts today instead of God bless you, because saying that type of thing apparently is politically incorrect enough in our tolerant society that offends people. Although there are studies that show that people aren't offended by it that much. Here's another thing that shows sort of the decline in culture. Few top colleges require history majors to study American history. Really? You can get a major, it's like UCLA. You can get a major in English literature and never have to read a word of Shakespeare. You know that? It's true. Now you don't have to study U.S. history to get a degree in history. You can take courses like the history of soccer in Guatemala and San Salvador. That's an acceptable history course in some colleges. There was actually a paper written about this, advanced placement, where you take tests to get college credit. And this has been critiqued by a man, David Randall, has critiqued it, and his paper is called, just released a couple weeks ago, The Disappearing Continent, a critique of the revised advanced placement European history examination. Now, what are some of the things that they don't allow anymore? What it says is the advanced placement rules, and I'll quote from the paper, presents the history of government rather than of liberty. The advanced placement rules present religion throughout as an instrument of power rather than as an autonomous sphere of European history. It treats the movement to abolish slavery without mentioning how it was inspired by religious faith. It also does things, this is for the European continent, it removes all references to religion and history. This is very Orwellian. It's rewriting history. It will change the world. If you don't remember where you came from, it's going to change where you're going. It's a fact. In fact, one person who's no longer mentioned in these standards, that you don't have to know anything about to get advanced placement, is a guy named Winston Churchill. I think he's probably been removed because he had the audacity to write a great history, the history of Anglo-Saxon people, history of English-speaking people, I think he wrote a long time ago. I think he wrote it. I know that there's been an update of that book, and it's really one of the more important historical works, but you don't need to know that now to get your advanced college degree. Well, let's look at a couple things going on in America. As you know, Loretta Lynch just happened to run into Bill Clinton on their private jets at Phoenix Airport, Sky Harbor this week. And it was interesting that she has her own security detail from the FBI. He has his Secret Service security detail. It's pretty clear now that he delayed his departure so that he would run into her. I know you have trouble believing that Bill Clinton would do such a thing, but he actually did. They had a private meeting And my understanding is her staff was going berserk during the meeting. Why? This looks really bad. Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation are all under investigation. Hillary was having a thing with the FBI. It happened yesterday, a 3.5-hour interview. That's a pretty long interview for the FBI. So Lynch came out at the end, and initially she said, look, I'm going to defer. I won't be involved. That was the implication. I won't be involved in the decision on whether Hillary gets prosecuted or not. And then she went on. She had a very rough week. I mean, she was in Phoenix, and she had to go to Aspen, Colorado. And she was interviewed by Jonathan Capehart from MSNBC during one of the sessions there at the Aspen Ideas Festival. And he asked her a question. I've cut out some of her answer. I'll get just so we can go to the money part. So here it is.
A lot of people were like, I mean, friends, supporters, backers were saying, what on earth was she thinking talking to Bill Clinton? So, what on earth were you thinking? What happened?
As I've always indicated, the matter is being handled by career agents and investigators with the Department of Justice. They've had it since the beginning. They are independent.
Which predates your tenure as Attorney General.
It predates my tenure as Attorney General. It is the same team, and they are acting independently. They follow the law. They follow the facts. That team will make findings. That is to say, they will come up with a chronology of what happened, the factual scenario. They will make recommendations as to how to resolve what those facts lead to. The recommendations will be reviewed by career supervisors in the Department of Justice and in the FBI, and by the FBI director. And then, as is the common process, they present it to me, and I fully expect to accept their recommendations. But I will be accepting their recommendations and their plan for going forward.
Well, they walked that back. They immediately had a DOJ spokesman come out and say, it's not quite right. She's still going to be the ultimate decider. And even though it's reviewed by career prosecutors who work in the department full-time, regardless of the administration, it's going to be reviewed by political appointees to decide what to do. So it was just a lot of, secondhand smoke, okay? In this case, it's toxic secondhand smoke. The Justice Department's chief spokesperson confirmed to Yahoo News that at least 2 political appointees, Assistant Attorney General for National Security John Carlin and Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, will review the recommendations of career prosecutors and agents before any final determination is made. We also had the meeting of the 3 amigos in Ottawa, Canada this week. The leaders of Canada, United States, and Mexico. President Obama did give this short sort of hint of what his plans were for his post-presidency period. By the way, I believe he's actually leaving office, okay? I know there's all these, he's going to declare martial law and all that stuff. I think he's got bigger plans. It's just, he's done with just this tiny little United States, okay? That's not enough. But here's what he plans to do.
When I ran in 2008, and the reason I ran again, and the reason even after I leave this office, I will continue to work in some capacity in public service, is because I care about people.
Okay, public service. What public service? Use your imagination. Look, he's going to make a lot of money, and he's got other plans. So he just won't have the big jet anymore. And we may have to get a new one because I think he's worn that one out. I was talking to somebody in D.C., and they said that the entourage that travels with this president on his trips is many, 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 many times larger than any other prior president ever. It's like 3 planes full of people and a fleet of cars. It's an amazing thing. Well, how did the Canadian Parliament, this was a news conference, he spoke at Canadian Parliament, and here was the reaction to his speech.
Canadians and Americans, allies and friends, now and forever. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Can you hear them chanting? 4 more years, 4 more years. Okay, and I'm like, okay, take him. Okay, you can have him. We will give him up. It's our, I don't know, it probably caused an international incident. You know, the Democratic Committee and others are going through their platform process. This guy, James Zogby, the pollster, big supporter of Arab American causes, Arab causes, was very upset because they refused to use the term occupation when it came to Palestine in the Democratic National Platform. So at least give them credit. They didn't put that in there, but understand that the Sanders supporters all wanted it in there. Now, a year ago, we had the Obergefell decision. They usually save a couple of their big decisions for the last day of the Supreme Court term, which is usually the last Monday in June. It starts the first Monday in October, goes to the last Monday in June, then they take the summer off. And the big ruling was the Hellerstedt case from Texas, and they struck down essentially all abortion limits. What Texas tried to do is they enacted a law that put in place restrictions on abortion clinics. And they said, you're doing surgery, so you have to meet ambulatory surgical center standards of care. Which seems to be, and in the past, the Supreme Court has said, you know, you can put restrictions on abortion that don't cause an undue burden. And by the way, Hillary Clinton came out, she's fully in support of this decision. And she did say, in response to another question, by the way, which George Stephanopoulos, I should have played the clip, but I showed mercy on you, but I'll tell you what was said. And George said, well, you know, what about the Second Amendment thing? And she goes, well, listen, I support all the rights in the Constitution, but I think they are all subject to reasonable regulation. So, Second Amendment rights subject to reasonable regulation. Now, what should George have done? Okay? He's been away from the White House now for a while, you know, probably been through therapy and stuff. He should be able to think a little more clearly than he did when he was under the Clintons' influence. I would have followed up and said, okay, but in light of the Supreme Court decision on Monday, Senator Clinton, or Secretary Clinton, or whatever she's called now, Her Highness maybe, I don't know, what do you think should be the reasonable regulations to be put in place on abortion? The problem with conservatives is they always control the narrative. They always make up the story. And it's about time that changes. Okay, so for example, when the Orlando shooting what was the left came out and what was it? We're having a sit-down strike in Congress until we put in gun control legislation. What should the other side of the aisle have done? Well, we're going to do a sit-down demonstration until you do something about unrestricted Islamic immigration into the United States. Fight. Fight it. Change the narrative, control the narrative. So in this case, on Second Amendment rights, okay, look, they want to put restrictions on it, then let's start asking them what restrictions are okay on abortion. And you know what the answer will be? The answer will be nothing. And there was this crazy demonstration of support out there. Justice Breyer, in his majority opinion, said this: we conclude that neither of these provisions offers medical benefits sufficient to justify the burdens upon access that each imposes. Each places a substantial obstacle in the path of women seeking a pre-viability abortion, and each constitutes an undue burden on abortion access, and each violates the federal Constitution. 5-3 decision, by the way. Justice Thomas, in a pretty scathing dissent, said, today the court strikes down two state statutory provisions and all of their applications at the behest of abortion clinics and doctors. That decision exemplifies the court's troubling tendency to bend the rules when any effort to limit abortion or even to speak in opposition to abortion is at issue. Absolutely right. Thank you, Justice Thomas. Justice Alito said this: if Pennsylvania had such a requirement enforced, the Gosnell facility may have been shut down before his crimes. And if there were any similarly unsafe facilities in Texas, House Bill 2 was clearly intended to put them out of business. By foregoing severability, what the court can do in this case is they can say, okay, this restriction is unconstitutional, and we're doing it out. This restriction makes common sense, it's okay, and we'll follow it. What the Supreme Court did in this case was that they threw them all out, every single one. And you'll see in a minute, it's only abortion clinics that have risen to the sacred level of unrestricted everything. First of all, it's not even in the Constitution like the Second Amendment, but it's found in the penumbra, in the shadows, I guess. For example, surgical center patients must be treated with respect, consideration, and dignity. That's thrown out. I guess they don't realize that. Patients may not be given misleading advertising regarding the competency and/or capabilities of the organization. That's enjoined. Centers must maintain fire alarm and emergency communication systems and eliminate hazards that might lead to slipping, falling, electrical shock, burns, poisoning, or other trauma. That is enjoined. So they don't have to comply with fire regulations and safety regulations. Do you understand how overreaching this decision is? This is a huge... Look, listen, there's a progression of, I said you could say the progression of allowing evil is like this, or the downward progression is like this. Whatever you want to say, we're in serious trouble. It's deep. Remember, this is what one candidate for president says about abortion rights.
Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will, and deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed. So
that was 1 year, that was April of 2015, before the Obergefell decision. And of course, remember this clip from President Obama after Obergefell saying this?
I know change for many of our LGBT brothers and sisters must have seemed so slow for so long. But compared to so many other issues, America's shift has been so quick. I know that Americans of goodwill continue to hold a wide range of views on this issue. Opposition in some cases has been based on sincere and deeply held beliefs. All of us who welcome today's news should be mindful of that fact. Recognize different viewpoints. Revere our deep commitment to religious freedom. But today should also give us hope that on the many issues with which we grapple, often painfully, real change is possible. Shifts in hearts and minds is possible. And those who have come so far on their journey to equality have a responsibility to reach back and help others join them.
Okay? You need to evolve if you don't agree with me. That's what they're saying. I mentioned this book last year by Michael Walsh and Diana West. His is The Devil's Pleasure Palace, The Cult of Critical Theory and the Subversion of the West. Her book, American Betrayal, The Secret Assault on Our Nation's Character. Both excellent books. I think two of the more important books, secular books that you can read. that really nail the problem that we face ourselves in our culture. Her name is Mary Eberstadt. She wrote a National Review this week and last week. She wrote 2 great articles on this. I'm going to read a little bit from them about what does the Supreme Court decision really mean. What's the takeaway? Now this, I agree with what she said, and you'll see this in just a minute. She says this: Democratic activist and former state legislator Wendy Davis, who ran for governor in Texas, told the Fort Worth Star-Telegram that she burst into tears yesterday learning that the Supreme Court had invalidated a Texas law aimed at raising the medical standards of abortion clinics. And she wasn't the only one responding that way. I was overjoyed, the Huffington Post said. I had tears welling up for the women of Texas and for reproductive freedom in this country. CNN, tears of joy, shock, and sighs of release. Twitter, just scream crying for the good news to people on the beach here in Florida! Exclamation point. She says this, Mary Eberstadt: anyone who doubts the transvaluation of secularist progressivism into a religious faith grounded in theology about the sexual revolution need look no further than the selfies and videos of all those weeping, hugging, rapturous devotees on the steps of the Supreme Court yesterday. This was no political demonstration. It wasn't an exercise in even political theater of the Occupy Wall Street variety. It was instead an outburst of quasi-religious euphoria, a Gnostic rave. This is exactly correct. I watched that stuff. The transported faithful may not have been on ecstasy, but they were in ecstasy of a kind familiar with the religious history of mystics, whirling dervishes, and revival tents. They were as intoxicated as, and I don't even know, Maenads and the people that go to a bacchanal. I'll translate that. I even took Latin. I don't remember how to say that. For that reason, yesterday's unbridled celebration should mark a turning point in the wider understanding of what secularist progressivism is now about. Plainly, as the matter of abortion goes to show, its mission has evolved. Once upon a time, liberals portrayed the procedure of abortion as a thing regrettable, but sometimes necessary. That was the cottony, safe, legal, and rare. Remember Hillary Clinton saying that many times? Piety of yesteryear. That old rhetorical dressing has been ripped off for good. The implications for constitutionalism of yesterday's decision will be the stuff of arguments elsewhere, the steamrolling of state law, the perverse transmogrification of lower medical standards into better medical standards, the unending socially destructive penumbras and emanations of Roe versus Wade itself. But for anyone still doubting that the West has given rise to a new faith, a point elaborated here on National Review Online last week, yesterday's visuals are an exhibition in full. And listen, we've talked about this, that there is coming a one world religion. And it's not going to rise overnight. It's going to be well down the road in place. And you can see it with people, even in the religious community, adopting these things. The dropping of standards of theology and doctrine in a lot of Christian denominations and fellowships. You can see it in the university, and this thing is going. Now, last week she wrote a book about, an article titled "The First Church of Secularism and Its Sexual Sacraments." In the new dispensation, so I guess the new secularist progressives are dispensationalists, I guess. That's a little bit of a joke. And I'm not equating the two. I want that to be clear before you start making all kinds of comments. In the new dispensation, traditional restrictions and attitudes are viewed as judgmental, moralistic forms of socially sanctioned aggression, especially against women and minorities. These victims of sexuality have become the new secular saints. Their virtue becomes their rejection and flouting of traditional sexual morality, and their acts are effectively transvalued as positive expressions of freedom. After all, Christians and other social dissidents today aren't threatened with job loss because of writing in self-published books about the biblical teaching against stealing. Say, military chaplains are not being removed from office and sidelined for quoting from the book of Ruth. But if you talk about the sexual mores of the Bible, you will be fired. I've given you a number of examples of where that's happened. The guy who was health director out in Pasadena went to Atlanta. He's lost a couple jobs now because he has the audacity to teach and write on this from a biblical worldview outside of work. And nobody says it has any effect on his job or his performance. She continues in her article this week, to weep for joy over the trashing of future generations may seem inexplicable. Even so, the quasi-theology beneath that seeming act of perversity is transparent enough. It's the same syllogism that's been there all along, ever since the technological shock of the birth control pill first stirred this new faith to life. Consenting sex is the highest good. Anything that interferes with this highest good is by definition evil. Therefore, whatever it takes to grease the wheels of the revolution is not only good too, it is cause for full-throated Dionysian celebration. We are witnessing something truly new under the same sun that earlier humans once worshipped, a secularist faith that will not acknowledge itself as faith, but behaves as only a faith can, replete with hagiography, demonology, scholasticism, sacraments, and an absolutist certainty that those who believe otherwise deserve punishment. This is a brilliant piece of writing, I think. We'll put the link up so you can read the whole thing. It's this faith that explains one seemingly inexplicable national fact, which is why the victors in the culture wars aren't being magnanimous in their victory. To true believers, their opponents are not fellow citizens to be accommodated. They are instead heretics in need of social exile. Great article. And I'll just say, it's prophetic in many senses. Do you see how this fits in to the passage in 2 Thessalonians 2 about their celebrating in unrighteousness? It's not fully here yet, but I think we can agree that it's well on its way. And it's what we should expect. Okay, let's look to Israel for a little bit. Did somebody move that clock ahead? This 13-year-old girl murdered in her bed in Israel, stabbed to death. The mother of the Palestinian terrorist got on and talked about, my son is a hero. He made me proud. My son died as a martyr defending Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds. He, my son, has joined the martyrs before him. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke about it.
Morning, a terrorist sneaked into the bedroom of a 13-year-old girl, Hillel Yaffe Ariel. He murdered young Hillel in cold blood. The picture of her blood-stained room is almost too hard to see. There's a teddy bear still on her bed, a red beanbag chair, some pictures on the wall, shoes tightly packed in a bin next to her bunk bed. Why would any person do this? You don't murder a sleeping child for peace. You don't slit a little girl's throat to protest a policy you don't like. You do this because you've been brainwashed. You've been brainwashed by a warped ideology that teaches you that this child isn't human. We will not let barbarism defeat humanity. There is no middle ground between beautiful Hillel and our unspeakably evil murderer. Today, each of us is going to fight back. I ask you to walk into your child's bedroom before they go to sleep. I ask you to hug them. I ask you to kiss them. Teach them that the values that Hillel's murderer most detested, freedom, diversity, pluralism, will never die. We'll always hold them dear. Tell them that we will never let fear, evil, and terror triumph. That we will always stand for justice. And this is how we will fight back. We fight back first by fighting back, fighting the terrorists, fighting their backers, fighting those who incite for such murder, whether in Hebron or in Orlando or in Berlin or in Ankara or in Belgium, anywhere. We fight back by making sure that our collective moral compass doesn't waver even a millimeter. Today we will cherish Hillel's memory. We will defend and honor her dignity by redoubling our efforts around the world to defeat the scourge of radical Islamist terror. May Hillel's memory forever be a blessing.
Here's her mother outside the hospital. My daughter was just sleeping. You turned down the sound a little. Tranquil, relaxed, a happy girl. When a terrorist came to her bed in Kiryat Arba and murdered her. I, the mother, am not saying anything. I just ask that everyone consider our pain. I ask everyone to come and console us, strengthen us, and tell us that our home, Kiryat Arba, is still a place to live in and not die in. That we may continue to love our place and our land. May Hillel Yaffe Ariel's memory be blessed. Here's a clip from her funeral, which I think was today or yesterday in Jerusalem. There's no translation. I think you'll get the point. This is the concluding of her mother's eulogy.
אבא, המשלוח הגיע, אני את התפקיד סיימתי, אבא, שמע ישראל, אדוני, אלוהינו, אדוני אחד, קח אותה.
Friday morning, a rabbi near Hebron was driving with his wife and 2 of his 10 children, and he was shot and killed by terrorists in the West Bank. Israel's response has been to impose some pretty tough restrictions on the West Bank. It's interesting, if you look at the New York Times headline, it doesn't say terrorist kills father of 10. It says Israel imposes tough restrictions on Palestinians in West Bank after attack. They are morally bankrupt. They are moral idiots. They cannot see this. It's stunning to watch this happen. So they've closed off, they're looking for the killer. Here are some of the rabbi's children asking people to come and to come to the funeral. He wasn't just our father, he was a father to so many people, and that's very important for us, that people come to the funeral because he truly was everyone's. Come everyone, here's something good about who our father was. And take something good from that, become better people. And here's a daughter-in-law speaking this morning at his funeral.
אתה עלית בצורה הכי מדהימה. אתה פשוט נרצחת על ידי קידוש השם בעולם. ועוד אחרי שטבעת במקווה, אבא צדיק שלי. אתה צדיק, אבא.
You get the point. I know you do. Elie Wiesel, who survived Auschwitz, in fact, he later identified this famous picture taken in the bunkhouse at Auschwitz. In the second row, he's the 7th from the left, as the Auschwitz death camp was liberated. And he became a tireless warrior for that. He passed away yesterday in Jerusalem. Tomorrow is a time of sort of mixed emotion celebration. It's been 40 years since the raid on Entebbe, when a team of Israeli soldiers flew 2,200 miles each direction to rescue about 100 hostages. 3 hostages died. 1 was murdered in a hospital later. All Jewish, and 1 Israeli soldier, Yoni Netanyahu, the older brother of Benjamin Netanyahu, was killed. The only Israeli soldier to lose his life. And they returned to this great celebration, but then there was also, these are scenes from Yoni's funeral. That's Benjamin Netanyahu there on the left. You see Shimon Peres, that's his father there on the right. And it was attended by all the leading military and governmental brass in Israel. If you go to my Facebook page, by the way, there's a link there where you can actually go watch the documentary for free if you want on Vimeo, called Follow Me, the story of Yoni Netanyahu. Very, very impressive story, very well done. And when you listen to Benjamin Netanyahu interviewed about the death of his older brother, you will understand why he spoke as he did there about the death of that 13-year-old girl in Israel this week. So Naftali Bennett's come out with some ways to stop terrorism. Response of the Prime Minister, bless his heart, is they're going to go build more homes in Kiryat Arba where this young lady was murdered. And they're looking at it. But being that it is the month of Ramadan, that means it's also the month of Islamic terrorism. We had the attack in Dhaka, Bangladesh. We also had the attack in Istanbul at the airport. Lebanon is on edge, fearing more attacks. I don't know if I have a slide for it. There was attacks in Baghdad this morning claimed by the Islamic State that killed over 80 people. This is the world that we live in. It's true. I don't know how else to say it. And the reports are that, this is showing that the Islamic State has increased its footprint. It's moving around the world. It's metastasizing. It's spreading. And even though they may be losing some territory in Syria, they're doing this. And in fact, in Dhaka, Bangladesh, now the New York Times, again, in their quest for accuracy, I guess, appealing to its base is ISIS tempers its violence in Muslim countries and said terrorists are told only to kill at random, only in the West. And their other headline, ISIS targeted a cafe known for students and foreigners. What they did was they went around and asked people to quote verses from the Quran. If they couldn't, they were stabbed, sliced, or shot and killed. It included students from 3 American universities, at least 1 American. Muslim people were spared. This is the, also yesterday was International Quds Day. There were rallies all over the world of people saying we're going to take back Jerusalem. Al-Qaeda came out, though, in response to the Orlando shooting, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to go a little bit over, because I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff, but there's a couple important things that I think we need to talk about. So Al-Qaeda has a magazine called Inspire. ISIS has a magazine called The Beak. It's named after a valley near Aleppo where there's supposedly one of the prophetic end-time battles of Islam are going to be, involving Islam, are going to be fought. So Inspire came out with, okay, they praised the Orlando shooter. He did a great job, but let's make these operations a little bit more efficient and a little bit more, I don't know how to say this, politically correct. Listen to what they say. This is their publication. The executor chose a homosexual nightclub, and even though the killing of such people is the most binding duty and closer to human nature, but better than this to avoid targeting areas where minorities are found. In other words, be politically correct, okay? Just get white, straight people, okay? Because we get a lot of fallout from this. If you just kill white, straight people, nobody cares about that. This is in order not to deviate the essence of the operation and letting it be termed as a small issue, and the American media is trying to portray in the case of Mateen. The Western media focused on the testimony by Mateen's father, who said that his son hates homosexuals and that terrorist ideas had no place in his motives. Well, I think his father was lying, but that's beside the point. The media tried to portray the operation motives to be against a particular group of people in order to turn the American public away from the real motives of the operation. Now, it's funny when Al-Qaeda is accusing the Western media of doing propaganda. It is better to avoid targeting places and crowds where minorities are generally found in America. Therefore, we advise targeting areas where the Anglo-Saxon community is generally concentrated. This class of the American community is the majority, and it is one that is in the American leadership. We finally call upon Muslims in America to take up arms in defense of their religion and the Islamic Ummah. We call upon every single Muslim in Western countries or in other countries who are able to travel to the West to follow in the footsteps of our hero, Umar Mateen, and his lights. To rise and strike America, the head of Kufr, to ask Allah to accept our hero, Mujahid, brother Umar Sadi Mateen, may Allah place him in the highest paradise with the messengers, prophets, and martyrs. Now, Megyn Kelly, start this. She had a little thing on terrorism. I want to listen to a few of these. I'll cut this a little bit short. I want you to listen to a few of these clips because they're talking about, okay, is Islam the problem? Can we say radical Islamic terrorism? So here's this guy. This guy makes my blood boil. He's a civil rights attorney. Ron Kobe or something is his name. And listen to what these people have to say. They'll have some Islamic imams speak also.
I mean, this is not a single-dimensional problem where you attack Muslims or political correctness or demand a whole community come out in a daily denunciation that no other community in this country is asked to do.
These people that are gunning other people down, they're not following Islam. That's for sure. But what's the problem? The problem is that the true message of Islam is not getting to them either.
Let's again turn to our panel. So this goes back to the discussion we were just having about whether some of these beliefs are baked into the Islamic faith. And I'll ask you about that, sir. Go ahead.
See, I've studied the Quran for 7 years, and nowhere in the Quran does it condone killing of any innocent human being. It actually says killing one person is equal to killing all of humanity.
So when the interpretation of groups like ISIS are effective...
By the way, Islam has their own emergent problem, okay? That man is, look, pray for these people, okay? That's about all you can do at this point. Argue with them and pray for them. Okay. And so there was a discussion back and forth, and one of the people finally concluded, we got to call it what it is. I mean, I'm going to go back and see if I can find this thing. Hang on. Oh, well, listen to this.
Are effective at recruiting people. They're also effective because these people are excluded politically, socially, economically. We know that has to be part of the conversation. And so when presidential candidates say we should ban entire communities from entering the United States, we are feeding into that fear. We are feeding into that process, which is equally a problem.
I understand that this is an ideological battle for those that are being radicalized in the United States. We need to establish the peaceful narrative of Islam if we're going to save these people from being radicalized. First of all, the problem that I see is that we keep fighting the media, we keep fighting the rhetoric against Islam that continues to demonize Muslims. When you demonize Muslims, you put youth like me, you put them aside and you say that your religion is going to, promotes this, then that's what they're going to accept.
Okay, now I'm going to move to the next thing, which is, by the way, go to C-SPAN, watch the whole thing. Phil Haney testified, Andrew McCarthy, Senator Cruz did a phenomenal job at chairing a committee on terrorism, homeland security. I'm going to play a clip of a lady who you may recognize if you remember my update from December. I did it when I was out in California, the Sunday after the San Bernardino shootings. Let's remember the timeline. The shootings took place on, I believe, Wednesday in San Bernardino. I actually flew into near there, Ontario, on Thursday. I was, within a couple hundred yards of where the shooting had taken place. I saw a massive police presence around there in the area. Any little thing was getting 10 sheriff cars and police cars showing up because everybody was on edge. The next night, okay, so that night, so the shooting happens on, as I recall, on Wednesday. Thursday night, Loretta Lynch goes to an organization's dinner, awards dinner, called Muslim Advocates. And she talks with the head of Muslim Advocates. You'll see her in just a moment, being questioned by Senator Cruz. And remember, they never mentioned San Bernardino or the cause of San Bernardino, but Loretta Lynch was saying in those clips that I played for you, we're not going to let anti-Muslim rhetoric stand. We're going to prosecute it as hate speech because we can't tolerate that. And an example of this is this poor little boy who made a clock that looked like a bomb and brought it to school, and he was persecuted. And we're going to bring civil charges or criminal charges against the school district. Because, of course, in the face of it, by that time, there was no doubt. There was no doubt where these people are coming from. In fact, I talked to someone this week who attends the Messianic congregation where the Jewish man attends who was killed. He was killed because he was Jewish by this Muslim terrorist. We have to be honest about it. So Cruz brings her in, and he brings Phil Haney testified, Andrew McCarthy, great testimony. Brought in Zuhdi Jasser, who's kind of styles himself as a moderate Islamic believer who wants to reform Islam, and then this lady who's head of Muslim advocates, and Ted's going to ask her questions about why was all the stuff about Islam removed. In the training materials for people in our government, all references to that have been removed. 126 of them before, now 0. What do you think about that? This is just absolutely stunning. And I don't want you to think that all lawyers are this way, okay? But enough of them are.
Ms. Kara, your organization asked John Brennan and the Obama administration to, quote, purge references such as this from law enforcement training materials, and at the request of your organization, the administration complied. Is it the position of your administration that the references to jihad and Muslim and Islam in the 9/11 Commission report were somehow offensive or bigoted?
So my organization's position is that training materials as well as intelligence products that were produced by the FBI are not only offensive and inflammatory and alienating Muslims and American Muslims, but more importantly...
you can go to, and you can find this chart that he used that shows all the times that they took all of this stuff out and they changed it to violent extremism. So she's going to explain, well, she's not going to answer the question, but she's going to talk.
They make us less safe. And the reason they make us less safe is that I think what the recent tragedies have shown us, including in Orlando, is that we need law enforcement.
They weren't tragedies, they were terrorist attacks.
More than ever, focusing on finding the needles in the haystack. And by broadly painting an entire faith community with a broad brush of suspicion, we're actually dumping more hay onto the haystack and making law enforcement's job more difficult. If I could just give an example.
With respect, I would like to ask you to just answer the specific question I asked, which is it your organization's position that the 126 references to jihad by the 9/11 Commission were some...
By the way, you see the name there on the right? That's Phil Haney. So I sent him an email. I said, how did you not, jump all over her? I mean, really. I mean, he's a wonderful man. Oh, for crying out loud. Hang on.
Were somehow offensive or bigoted.
Let me, I want to make it clear, Mr. Chairman, that our concern is about not just terminology, but it's about what these materials are communicating. So it's not just about using the word jihad or Muslim, but it's what it's communicating to agents and what it's communicating to the general public.
You don't think it was bigoted to use jihad? I just want to understand your organization's position, whether or not it is bigoted to use the word jihad.
So this is when I think it's problematic. I think it's when we have public officials, whether it's members of Congress, members of the administration, who are going out and describing the problem as a problem of jihad or a problem of radical Islamic terrorism. That's a problem because it's actually playing in to the propaganda frame of ISIS, and it makes us less safe because ISIS wants this to be a war against Islam, and by using religiously loaded terminology like jihad, we're playing into their into their mindset. And it would be, I might add, it's not only that, but it's also just grossly inaccurate. I think we need to call the threat what it is. It's ISIS, it's Al-Qaeda. And it's no different than the KKK or those who attack abortion clinics. We wouldn't go and say there's a problem with radical Christianity or radical Christian terrorism. We call the threat what it is. It's the KKK. It's those who are attacking women's health clinics.
So, Ms. Kara, I will note that I've asked you now twice if your organization has the view that the 9/11 Commission report was bigoted or offensive, and twice you have declined to answer that pretty straightforward question. So let me try it a different direction.
Oh, well, maybe I didn't understand your question properly, Mr. Chairman. The use of the term in general by the 9/11 Commission report, I don't think is problematic in itself. I think it's in general, as officials are talking about what the threat is. I think that's what the threat. That's what my concern is.
Well, if it wasn't a concern, then why would it be purged from 126 down to 0,000?
I can't explain the administration's.
I
can't. I obviously cannot speak for the administration and these government agencies that did that, and what their thinking was, and developing those documents.
They did so in response to a request from your organization in writing calling for a quote purge.
We asked training materials. That's what we called for.
Well, let me try it a different direction. On March 16th, 2015, the Long Island Press quoted Glenn Catan, who is the legal director for your organization, as saying, quote, like, what are you going to do about radicalization in the Muslim community? That's nonsense. There is no such thing. I'm curious, do you agree with the legal director of your organization that there is no such thing as radicalization in the Muslim community?
Well, this is what we do believe, Mr. Chairman. What we believe, and this is based on attacks we've seen in our country in just the last year alone, whether it's the Orlando shooting, the attack on a women's health clinic, the attack at the AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, we know that extremist violence takes many forms and people motivated regardless of their race, religion, or ideology. And what we also know is that there's no pathway, so to speak, to get to that point of engaging in violence. What the national security and law enforcement experts say is that the common thread that you see is vulnerable individuals who are seeking a sense of purpose. And so we totally disabuse and do not believe in this canard that there's somehow a pathway to radicalization. And that's what numerous studies have shown as well.
So I want to give you just one more opportunity to answer the question directly, because I don't believe you did. Do you agree with your legal director who said, quote, there is no such thing as radicalization in the Muslim community?
There are violent individuals in all communities, including the Muslim community. But is
it connected to any ideology?
There are some people who where there is ideology that's a part, but ideology is not the center or even part of the center of the causation for what causes people to engage in violence. And it's not just me that's saying that. It's experts like my colleague, Mr. German, and law enforcement and national security experts who say that.
So I'm just going to give you one more opportunity to say whether yes or no you agree with the legal director that there's no such thing as radicalization in the Muslim community. I'll note for the record, Senator Durbin apparently doesn't want you to answer that question.
I would like you to show the courtesy of this witness instead of badgering her.
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator
Chairman, you've been very courteous.
I'd like an administration that shows the courtesy to the victims of radical Islamic terrorism and doesn't edit a 9/11 call from a terrorist who's murdering 49 people in Orlando and pretending the threat doesn't exist.
Okay. And by the way, go look at that, because Phil and Andy McCarthy both responded to that. We just don't have time to play it this morning. And this is a problem. You know, look, Turkey made a deal with Israel, you know, to stabilize the region, and look what happened. ISIS attacked them the next day. Foreign policy says that this shows the dangerous new face of the Islamic State. Clarion Project talks about the fact that they're on the doorstep of this battle in the Beak, that a lot of these people and these groups view as apocalyptic and very significant in their end-time eschatology. It's a graphic from the New York Times this morning, or this week, about attacks directed or inspired by ISIS. Here's a graphic chart that shows all the attacks just since last October that have happened. This is a thing on the decline of the Islamic State. Let's see, I'm trying to decide whether I should do it because it's a holiday weekend. If you have to leave, go ahead and leave. This should only take about another 6 or 7 minutes. Brexit. You know, it's had a lot of effect. Britain, Great United Kingdom deciding to leave the European Union. The people in charge there are not reacting very well to it. However, the leader of this movement, who was in the European Union Parliament for 17 years, I don't know how he stood it, gave a sort of a farewell speech of sorts this week, Nigel Farage. Here's a little bit of that.
Funny, isn't it? Thank you very much for that very warm welcome. How things have changed.
Just a second, Mr. Farage. Ladies and gentlemen, one major quality of democracy is that you listen to those, even if you don't share their opinion.
Well, thank you, Mr. Schultz. Isn't it funny? You know, when I came here 17 years ago, and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you? And the reason you're so upset, the reason you're so angry, has been perfectly clear from all the angry exchanges this morning. You, as a political project, are in denial. You're in denial that your currency is failing. You're in denial. Well, just look at the Mediterranean. No. As a policy to impose poverty on Greece and the rest of the Mediterranean, you've done very well. And you're in denial over Mrs. Merkel's call last year for as many people as possible to cross the Mediterranean into the European Union has led to massive divisions between countries and within countries. But the biggest problem you've got, and the main reason the United Kingdom voted the way that it did, is you have, by stealth, by deception, without ever telling the truth to the British or the rest of the peoples of Europe, you have imposed upon them a political union. You've imposed upon them a political union. And when the people in 2005 in the Netherlands and France voted against that political union, when they rejected the Constitution, you simply ignored them and brought the Lisbon Treaty in through the back door. What happened last Thursday was a remarkable result. It was indeed a seismic result, not just for British politics, for European politics, but perhaps even for global politics too, because what the little people did, what the ordinary people did, what the people who have been oppressed over the last few years and seen their living standards go down, they rejected the multinationals, they rejected the merchant banks, they rejected big politics, and they said, actually, we want our country back, we want our fishing waters back, we want our borders back, we want to be an independent, self-governing, normal nation, and that is what we have done, and that is what must happen. And in doing so, we now offer a beacon of hope to Democrats across the rest of the European continent. I'll make one prediction this morning: the United Kingdom will not be the last member state to leave the European Union. So the question is, what do we do next? Now, it is up to the British government to invoke Article 50, and I have to say that I don't think we should spend too long in doing it. I totally agree, Mr. Juncker, that the British people have voted. We need to make sure that it happens. But what I would like to see is a grown-up and sensible attitude to to how we negotiate a different relationship. Now I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives, or worked in business, or worked in trade, or indeed ever created a job. But listen, just listen.
Herr Farage, Augenblick. Mr. Farage, just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, I do understand that you're getting emotional, but you're acting like UKIP normally acts in this chamber, so please, don't imitate them. Mr. Farage, however, I would say one thing to you. The fact that you're claiming nobody has done a decent job in their life, you can't really say that. I'm sorry.
No, you're quite right, Mr. Schultz. UKIP used to protest against the establishment, and now the establishment protests against UKIP. So something has happened here.
Well, anyway, it's a great little speech that he gave, and they had these massive rally in London yesterday. People came out dressed as the EU, I guess, and thousands of people, tens of thousands, came out to protest the leaving. They want a new vote. I don't think it's going to happen. Of course, you see Parliament Square there in London. The EU's response to this has been to immediately come out with this statement that they're going to make it a stronger EU. A lot of people think this is prophetic. It may or may not be. We'll have to see how this goes. In the face of sort of the dominoes falling in Europe and a lot of people wanting to leave, this report that they issued says this: we live in times of existential crisis within and beyond the European Union. Now, they had this come out pretty quick after the vote, so I think they knew how the vote was going to go. Our union is under threat. Our European project, which has brought unprecedented peace, prosperity, and democracy, is being questioned. Our shared interest and principles, the European Union, we will promote peace and guarantee security. What is it? Did I read a verse that said when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes? The EU will promote a rules-based global order. Okay, so they're falling apart, but they're going to go international. The security of our union, the EU global strategy starts at home. Our union has enabled citizens to enjoy unprecedented security. By the way, I kind of threw in the picture of the attack in Brussels, just the unprecedented security, democracy, and prosperity. Yet today, terrorism, hybrid threats, economic volatility, climate change, you got to throw that in, and energy insecurity endanger our people and territory. Also released this week was the Quartet report on a two-state solution. Also, another report came out this week restoring, like I said, do these guys ever take vacations? Maybe they're always on vacation, who knows? Restoring the power and purpose of the NATO alliance. So they're going in a number of different directions to hold this thing together. As NATO leaders prepare to meet in Warsaw this July, the alliance faces the greatest threats to peace and security in Europe since the end of the Cold War. The most pressing fundamental challenges include a revanchist Russia, eroding stability in the greater Middle East, a weakened European Union, and uncertain American and European leadership. It sounds like they listened to Prophecy Update here. The next president of the United States must lead in restoration of NATO's power and purpose to defend Europe and North America from the most serious security challenges since the end of the Cold War. There's a section in there called the strategic context. NATO's unstable periphery unsettles European allies. Back to the Quartet report. That was the EU, Russia, United States, and I can't remember the fourth member of the Quartet are calling for this peace plan. So they came out and they're promoting their peace plan. So again, I guess I think the thing that you would take away from all of this is that everything is in play. Question is, what does this mean for Israel? That's, I think, important. And the answer is, I don't know. Caroline Glick has a good article this week called Israel's Diplomatic Spring. I won't read any of it. You can go look it up at JPOS. It was in Friday's paper. And she essentially says, you know, a lot of people are coming to us now asking us to help them out. And so we ought to capitalize on that. So that's called Israel's diplomatic spring. So look, takeaway from today is it is a very chaotic world. There's a lot going on. I agree with you. You know, I look at the news some days and I say, enough. Really, enough. But remember this, and I've used this illustration a number of times. On a really bright day, outside, a really bright flashlight is not that noticeable. I mean, you can get one of those industrial LEDs, like for security. By the way, they're very effective. I accidentally, you know, I'm a guy, okay, you know. I'm the kid who used to stick his finger in the light, take the light bulb out and stick his finger in the socket just to see what would happen. And it'll knock you on your backside is what it'll do if you know. So I, you know, kind of looked at one of those things, and then, you know, a day later the spots started to disappear a little bit. So it's a very effective security thing. If that you can really, I think everybody should carry one. And but that won't, if it's a bright sunny day outside, that won't have any impact. But make it dark, make it the middle of the night, and that light is incredibly effective. That's how the Christian should be. Let your light so shine before men. As it gets darker, the light that believers emanate from their faith in Jesus Christ will shine brighter. And so let it shine. Let's pray. Father, thanks for your word. Bless us as we go this week, Lord. We pray that you will help us to have our light shine. Lord, we pray that you will watch over each of us and keep us safe from harm. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.